The emergency beacon had been broadcasting for 83 hours. No warship came. No rescue fleet answered. Only silence. Inside the drifting quarantine vessel, 312 alien children sat huddled together outside a sealed medical bay, refusing to sleep, refusing to leave. Every few minutes, one of them would softly knock on the metal door and whisper the same single word. Dad? The man inside wasn't their father. He wasn't even their species. He was the last human doctor assigned to a refugee mission everyone else had already abandoned. His medical scanner showed the impossible. Every child aboard carried a disease that should have killed them days ago. Every treatment had failed. Every government had written the ship off. And hidden deep inside the ship's computer was one classified message that changed everything. Do not rescue the children. The emergency beacon had been broadcasting for 83 hours. No warship came. No rescue fleet answered. Only silence. Inside the drifting quarantine vessel, 312 alien children sat shoulder to shoulder outside a sealed medical bay. None of them cried anymore. None of them slept. Every few minutes, one tiny hand reached forward and tapped softly against the cold steel door. Dad? No answer. The children waited anyway. 6 months earlier, the hospital ship Mercy of Dawn drifted through a peaceful sector of space, its engines humming with quiet purpose. It had never been designed for permanence, just a temporary refuge, a flying hospital carrying the last surviving children of the Kareth civilization, after their worlds had been consumed by a biological catastrophe no one fully understood. Military escorts flanked the vessel like nervous guardians, calling the small passengers priority assets. The medical staff referred to them as patients, treatment plans, case numbers. Only one man aboard called them children. Dr. Ethan Vale knelt beside a tiny blue-skinned girl, whose 6 luminous eyes were fixed on a broken mechanical bird, lying motionless in her trembling palms. He observed her silence for a long moment before speaking with the gravity of a surgeon addressing a critical operation. I think your patient needs emergency surgery. The little girl tilted her head, curiosity flickering across her features. Can she survive? Ethan examined the toy through an imaginary medical scanner, his expression shifting from professional concern to theatrical alarm. He frowned dramatically, drawing a soft gasp from the girl. Her condition is extremely serious. She clutched the bird tighter, her lower lip beginning to tremble. But, Ethan continued, reaching into his pocket for a miniature screwdriver he always carried for exactly these moments, I happen to be the greatest toy surgeon in 3 galaxies. 5 minutes later, the bird fluttered its tiny metal wings again, wobbling upward before achieving a clumsy but functional flight pattern. The girl's eyes widened with pure wonder. She hugged the repaired creature against her chest, as if Ethan had brought a real creature back from the dead, her small body shaking with overwhelmed emotion. You fixed her. Ethan smiled gently. I told you. She hesitated, glancing around at the other children who had gathered to witness the miracle. Then she wrapped both tiny arms around his neck, pressing her alien face against his human cheek with complete trust. Thank you. Dad. The corridor became strangely quiet. Several nurses looked toward Ethan with expressions caught somewhere between surprise and something softer. He laughed awkwardly, patting the girl's back before gently disentangling himself. I'm definitely not old enough for that title. The girl looked genuinely confused, her 6 eyes blinking in sequence. But, she pointed at the other children gathered nearby, you fix nightmares. Another finger extended, you stop monsters. Another, you make everyone smile. She looked up with the devastating innocence only children possess. That is what fathers do. No one knew how to answer that. The silence stretched uncomfortably until another child shouted something about wanting their toy repaired too, breaking the tension with innocent demand. The nickname spread faster than any official designation ever had. At breakfast, small voices called across the mess hall. Dad, can you open this? In the makeshift classroom, eager questions interrupted lessons. "Dad, how do humans count to 100? Before bedtime, whispered requests followed him down darkened corridors. "Dad, can you tell us another story about Earth?" Every single time, Ethan corrected them with patient repetition. "I'm Dr. Vale." Every single time, they ignored him completely. The title had taken root in their minds, watered by every scraped knee he bandaged, and every nightmare he chased away with gentle stories of oceans he hadn't seen in years. One evening, head nurse Leora found him sitting alone in the observation lounge, watching dozens of children chase each other through artificial gravity fields. Their laughter echoed through the ship like something forbidden, joy in a place designed only for survival. She approached quietly, settling into the seat beside him with a knowing smile that made him immediately defensive. "You've given up correcting them." Ethan sighed deeply, rubbing his tired eyes. "I lasted 3 weeks. They adore you. I just patch scraped knees. You also sit with them during nightmares. They're children. You memorize 312 birthdays. They're patients. You learned their language. They were lonely. You haven't slept properly in months." Ethan stared through the enormous observation window where distant stars drifted silently past, their cold light doing nothing to warm the void between them. The children continued playing behind him, their laughter like music he couldn't bear to silence. "They've already lost everyone." His voice grew quieter, raw with something he refused to name. "I refuse to let them feel abandoned again." Leora said nothing. She simply placed a steaming cup of coffee beside him, the warmth of it a small comfort against the frozen reality outside. She studied his profile for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You know," she whispered, almost to herself, "you're a terrible liar." Life aboard the Mercy of Dawn slowly became something neither military command nor refugee officials had ever planned. The cold corridors transformed into something warmer, something almost resembling a home. Every Friday became Earth Night, a tradition that began when Ethan casually mentioned grass and snow and things none of these children had ever seen. They begged him to tell stories about oceans so vast they covered entire planets, rain that fell from the sky like the universe was weeping, dogs that barked and wagged their tails and loved unconditionally, ice cream that tasted like joy, snow that made everything quiet and beautiful and new. One little boy became absolutely convinced that ducks were Earth's most dangerous predators because Ethan jokingly refused to explain why humans feared geese. For nearly 10 minutes, the medical bay echoed with increasingly heated arguments about whether a goose could defeat a battle tank. The debate grew so passionate that several adults stopped working to listen, their laughter mixing with the children's earnest speculation. Even Ethan laughed until tears formed in his eyes, wiping them away with the back of his hand while trying to maintain professional composure. For a little while, the war didn't exist. The catastrophe didn't exist. The losses didn't exist. There was only this moment, these children, this fragile pocket of peace drifting through infinite darkness. 3 days later, everything changed. Without warning, the ship lurched violently enough to throw several crew members from their feet. Every light flickered simultaneously, plunging the vessel into darkness for one terrifying heartbeat before emergency systems kicked in. Artificial gravity failed completely. Children floated upward in terrified silence, their small bodies drifting like lost balloons while their voices caught in their throats. Then every alarm aboard the ship screamed at once, a chorus of electronic agony that drilled into ears and skulls. Red lights painted the corridors in blood. The bridge called immediately, the captain's voice strained with barely controlled panic. "Dr. Vale." Ethan grabbed the nearest handhold to stabilize himself, his heart hammering. "I'm here. Get to Medical Bay 3, now!" He didn't ask questions. He ran, pushing through the chaos of floating equipment and disoriented crew members, his feet finding purchase on walls and ceilings as the artificial gravity continued to malfunction. The corridor looked like a battlefield. Crew members collapsed where they stood, their bodies folding without warning. One engineer was vomiting blood, red droplets floating around his face like grotesque ornaments. Another convulsed uncontrollably, limbs jerking in unnatural directions. A nurse crashed into the wall before sliding motionless onto the deck, her eyes open and empty. Every victim was an adult. Every single one. Ethan dropped beside the nearest patient, his medical scanner already extended. No pulse irregularities, no external wounds, no toxin signatures. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. His scanner refused to classify whatever it was seeing, the readings shifting and dancing like something alive that didn't want to be observed. Behind him, 312 frightened children stood untouched, perfectly healthy, watching him with wide, confused eyes. "Dad?" One little voice whispered, barely audible above the screaming alarms. "Why are they sleeping?" Ethan looked back at them, forcing his trembling lips into something resembling a smile. "They're sick. Can you fix them?" He wanted to say yes. He wanted to be the father they believed him to be, capable of healing anything, protecting them from everything. Instead, he simply nodded. "I'll do everything I can." The lie hurt more than he expected. It sat in his chest like broken glass, cutting deeper with every breath. Medical Bay 3 became chaos personified. Doctors collapsed while treating other doctors, their patients forgotten as they became patients themselves. Robotic surgical arms continued operating after their operators died, mechanically stitching wounds on corpses. Stretchers filled faster than they could be emptied, bodies piling up in corners like discarded refuse. Ethan worked continuously for 19 hours straight. No cure, no diagnosis, no pattern. Every test contradicted the last, the disease seeming to rewrite itself each time he observed it, as if mocking his efforts to understand. Then patient 47 died, then 52, then 91. Within hours, more than half the adult crew was gone, their bodies cooling in the rapidly filling morgue. Still, not one child showed a single symptom. Not one. Ethan stared at the growing list of casualties, his exhausted mind racing through possibilities he didn't want to consider. Something wasn't right. This wasn't an outbreak. It felt targeted, deliberate, personal. The bridge finally re-established contact with Allied Command. Every surviving crew member stopped what they were doing, hope flickering in hollow eyes. Surely rescue had finally arrived. The captain answered immediately, his voice cracking with desperate relief. "This is refugee vessel Mercy of Dawn. We have catastrophic casualties. We require immediate medical evacuation." Several seconds of static stretched into an eternity. Then a calm military voice answered, professional and utterly detached. It asked only one question, not how many survivors, not what happened, not even can we help? Instead, the voice quietly asked, "Confirm immediately. Are all 312 children still alive?" Silence swallowed the bridge whole. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes from the medical scanner, his blood running cold. Something heavy settled deep inside his chest, a weight that had nothing to do with gravity. Because for the very first time, he realized this disaster might never have been an accident at all. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the hull, something was listening. The bridge remained silent after Allied Command's question cut through the static like a blade. No one moved. No one breathed. Captain Helena Rose slowly turned toward Dr. Ethan Vale, her eyes searching his face for something neither of them could name. Ethan answered before anyone else could speak. "Yes." Another pause stretched into an eternity. Then Command spoke again, its voice cold and professional and utterly devoid of emotion. "Maintain quarantine protocols. We are dispatching further instructions. Not rescue, not medical support. Instructions." The transmission ended with a click that echoed through the bridge like a gunshot. Nobody on the bridge moved for a long moment. Commander Ruiz finally broke the silence, his voice sharp with disbelief. "That's it?" They didn't even ask how many adults survived. Captain Rowe clenched her jaw so tightly the muscles in her neck stood out like cables. She looked exhausted, hollow, as if she'd aged decades in the past few hours. They already know. Every officer slowly turned toward her. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What do you mean?" She gestured weakly toward the main display. Military satellites monitor every refugee convoy continuously. They already knew our casualty numbers before we contacted them. The realization hit everyone at once, spreading through the bridge like a wave of ice water. If command already knew how many had died, then why wasn't anyone coming? Why wasn't help on its way? 43 minutes later, another encrypted transmission arrived. This one carried Omega-level military authorization, the highest classification possible. Only the captain could open it. Her fingerprint, retinal scan, DNA confirmation. The message appeared on her private terminal, and Captain Rowe's face turned white as fresh snow. Ethan stepped closer. "What is it?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she silently handed him the data pad, her fingers trembling against the screen. The display contained only 3 lines of text, stark and unforgiving against the black background. Primary objective: preserve human personnel. Secondary objective: prevent biological containment failure. Authorization: Dr. Ethan Vale is ordered to evacuate immediately. Ethan read it twice, then a third time. His heartbeat slowed to something heavy and deliberate. "That's impossible." The captain nodded slowly. "There are over 300 children aboard. I know, there are only adults dying. I know, they're telling me to leave them. I know." Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The weight of it pressed down on Ethan's shoulders like a physical force. They wanted him to abandon the children, every single one of them. The ones who called him dad, the ones who drew pictures and saved him dinner and believed he could fix anything. Ethan walked through the ship alone, his footsteps echoing through corridors that felt different now. Empty. Too quiet. Medical drones carried white-covered bodies toward temporary storage, their mechanical arms moving with cold efficiency. The familiar smell of antiseptic had been replaced by something colder, something that clung to the back of his throat. Loss. As he reached the children's deck, everything changed. Tiny footsteps echoed toward him from every direction, a small army of hope that refused to be extinguished. "Dad?" 30, 40, then hundreds of children surrounded him, their faces bright with desperate relief. One little boy proudly held up a handmade paper rocket, its fins slightly crooked but its spirit undeniable. "Look, it flies now." Another girl tugged gently on his sleeve, her 6 eyes blinking in sequence. "We saved dinner for you." A tiny Kareth child climbed into his arms without asking permission, wrapping her small limbs around his neck like she'd never let go. "You forgot bedtime story yesterday." Ethan's voice cracked. "I'm sorry, you were fixing everyone. I tried." She smiled, that devastatingly innocent smile that made his chest ache. "You'll fix them." He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to believe her. He held her closer, breathing in the scent of her fur and the warmth of her small body against his. For a moment, just a moment, he let himself pretend everything would be okay. That evening, Ethan examined every child again. Temperature, blood, DNA, brain activity, immune response. Every result was impossible. Not only were they healthy, their bodies were actively resisting the disease, almost studying it, as if something inside their immune systems already understood the infection on a fundamental level, knew how to fight it before it could take hold. He stared at one blood sample, then another. His scanner suddenly displayed something new, a flicker of data that made him freeze. Unknown genetic sequence detected. He enlarged the image, trying to capture it, but it disappeared. A software glitch? He repeated the scan. Nothing. His scanner refused to reproduce the result, as if the data had never existed at all. A chill ran down his spine. He tried again. Same result. Nothing. Whatever he'd seen, it had vanished the moment he tried to observe it. The ship shook violently, throwing Ethan against the examination table. Power flickered. Emergency lights turned crimson, painting the medical bay in blood. The AI spoke, its voice flat and emotionless. Warning. Long-range scan detected. Everyone froze. Bridge officers rushed toward their consoles, fingers flying across controls. Commander Ruiz cursed under his breath. They found us. The main screen lit up, displaying 8 black warships that slowly emerged from hyperspace. No identification, no diplomatic codes. Only one symbol burned across every hull, a silver spiral surrounding a child's hand. Elegant and terrible in its simplicity. Captain Rowe whispered something Ethan had never heard before. The collectors. Ethan frowned. You know them? She closed her eyes. I prayed I'd never see them. The unknown fleet transmitted a message. The bridge speakers crackled, and then an old man's calm voice filled the room, warm and reasonable and utterly terrifying. There is no need for further bloodshed. Return the children. We will spare every remaining adult. Silence. Captain Rowe slowly leaned toward the microphone, her voice steady despite everything. They are children. They are not property. The old man almost sounded amused. No, they are the future, and they belong to us. The transmission ended, leaving only static and fear behind. Hours later, life support alarms echoed through the ship. The disease had entered its final stage. Only 14 adult crew members remained alive, including Ethan. Captain Rowe called him back to the bridge, her face pale and drawn. Without speaking, she pointed toward the escape bay camera. One escape pod remained fully operational. Every other pod had been remotely disabled. Ethan frowned. Power failure? No. Ruiz enlarged the maintenance logs. Every disabled pod carried the same authorization code. Allied High Command. Someone had disabled them. Before the mission even began, only one pod still worked. Pod 7. Assigned to Dr. Ethan Vale. The bridge became deathly silent. They planned this, Ruiz whispered. They always planned this. That night, Ethan stood alone inside Escape Bay 7. The pod's hatch stood open, its systems active, coordinates already uploaded. A safe route. A rescue ship waited 3 light-years away. Everything was prepared. Someone had expected him to survive. Only him. He stepped inside. The engines hummed quietly. His hand hovered above the launch control. One touch. He would live. He would escape. He would leave them all behind. Behind him, soft footsteps echoed through the hangar. He turned. The children. Every single one of them. No one knew how they'd found him. No one spoke. The smallest girl walked forward. Something folded behind her back. She smiled nervously. I made this. She handed him a drawing. Crayons. Crooked lines. Bright colors. In the center, a tall human stood holding hundreds of tiny blue hands. Across the top, written in shaky English, Best Dad in the Galaxy. Ethan's vision blurred. He slowly folded the picture, placed it inside his jacket, and climbed back out of the escape pod. The children watched silently. He walked to the emergency control panel beside the launch rail, removed the master ignition core, and without hesitation, threw it into the ship's fusion recycler. The reactor swallowed it forever. Escape Pod 7 went dark. The little girl blinked. Dad. Does that mean? Ethan smiled. It means. He looked at every frightened little face surrounding him. Nobody gets left behind. For the first time since the outbreak began, the children smiled. The smile lasted exactly 12 seconds. Then every light aboard the ship went black, complete darkness. The emergency generator activated, and a metallic voice echoed through every corridor. Warning. Unauthorized biological signature detected. Life form located on Deck 9. Deck 9 has been sealed for 218 days. Captain Rowe's frightened voice burst through Ethan's communicator. Ethan, there shouldn't be anyone alive down there. Then the security cameras switched on by themselves. One by one. Every monitor across the ship displayed the same image. A lone figure, walking slowly through the abandoned research laboratory. Smiling directly into the camera, the figure smiled at the cameras, a warm expression that didn't reach his ancient eyes, And then every monitor aboard the Mercy of Dawn went black. For 3 long seconds, nobody breathed. Captain Helena Rowe was the first to speak, her voice cutting through the suffocating silence like a blade. Deck 9 was evacuated before we left Kareth Prime. Commander Ruiz stared at the security logs, his fingers trembling against the console. No. His voice cracked. It wasn't evacuated. It was erased. Dr. Ethan Vale felt something tighten inside his chest, a cold knot of dread that had nothing to do with the ship's failing life support. Show me. Ruiz opened the ship's original blueprint, the official schematics approved by Allied Command. Every deck appeared in crisp holographic detail. 1, 2, 3, 8, 10. Deck 9 didn't exist. Someone had literally removed it from the official records, scrubbing it from existence like it had never been built. Every military record, every maintenance log, every crew briefing, gone. As if that entire section of the ship was nothing more than a ghost. Then why was someone walking there? Another transmission interrupted their stunned silence. Not from Allied Command, not from the collector fleet, from inside the ship. The screen flickered and a man appeared, late 60s, white hair that had once been dark, a neatly trimmed beard stained with something that might have been coffee or might have been blood. He wore an old laboratory coat, yellowed with age and covered in chemical burns, and he smiled politely at the bridge crew as if greeting old friends. "Good evening, Dr. Vale." Ethan froze, his mind racing through decades of memories. "I know you. Oh." The old man chuckled softly, a sound that held no warmth. "You don't remember, but I remember everything." Behind him, glass chambers stretched endlessly into darkness, hundreds of them lining walls that seemed to go on forever. Every chamber was empty, their interiors dark and lifeless, except one. Inside floated a sleeping child, suspended in pale blue liquid, perfectly preserved and utterly still. The transmission ended. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Captain Rowe looked at Ethan, her eyes searching his face. "You've never seen him?" Ethan slowly shook his head, the motion feeling unnatural. "No." Then something strange happened. One memory surfaced, just a fragment. A medical university. A lecture hall filled with eager young students. Someone standing at the podium, saying something that had stuck with Ethan for years. "Never accept military research funding." The face looked familiar. Very familiar. But he couldn't remember why, couldn't place where he'd seen those eyes before. The collector fleet began moving. 8 warships spread into formation around the drifting hospital ship, their silver hulls gleaming in the distant starlight. They didn't fire. They simply waited, watching, almost patiently, like predators studying wounded prey. Then another message arrived, the same calm old voice filling the bridge. "You have 1 hour. Return the children willingly, or we will board the vessel." Captain Rowe disconnected the transmission with a sharp motion. "They're stalling." Ruiz frowned, his broken ribs protesting the movement. "For what?" Ethan answered quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're waiting for something." Medical Bay 3. 30 minutes later. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the strange blood sample, the genetic anomaly that had appeared and disappeared like a ghost in his scanner. He reran every test. Again. 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 The unknown genetic sequence appeared, then disappeared. Appeared, then disappeared. Almost like it knew it was being watched, like it was playing a game with his equipment. He enlarged the molecular structure, pushing the scanner to its absolute limits. This time, the machine translated a tiny portion of the sequence. Genetic memory cluster detected. Genetic memory. That wasn't possible. DNA stored biological information, inherited traits, predispositions to disease. Not memories, not experiences. His scanner had to be malfunctioning. Then every children's sample displayed the exact same result. Not one child, all 312. Each carried a different genetic pattern like pieces of something much larger. A tiny knock interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Dad? The little blue girl stood outside the laboratory clutching the same mechanical bird he'd repaired months ago. Her 6 eyes blinked up at him with an expression of pure concern. You forgot story time. Ethan looked at the clock. He had. Again. I'm sorry. She smiled anyway, that devastatingly innocent smile that always managed to cut through his exhaustion. It's okay. We can read to you tonight. He laughed despite himself, the sound rusty and unfamiliar. I'd like that. She suddenly became serious, her small face solemn. Dad, when everyone gets scared, who helps doctors? The question hit harder than any weapon ever could. He crouched beside her, bringing himself to her eye level. You just did. She hugged him tightly, her small arms wrapping around his neck. I knew you looked lonely. A violent explosion shook the ship, throwing them both against the wall. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut with deafening crashes. Bridge alarms screamed through every corridor. Commander Ruiz's voice echoed across internal communications, strained and desperate. Boarding craft! They're coming aboard! The collectors had finally begun. Captain Rowe immediately activated internal defense drones. Only 6 responded. The rest had been destroyed during the outbreak, their remains scattered across the ship like broken toys. Security cameras displayed dozens of armored figures cutting through the outer hull, their plasma torches glowing orange against the darkness of space. None carried rifles. None carried explosives. Instead, each soldier carried strange silver containers that hummed with contained energy. Ethan frowned at the display. What are those? Captain Rowe whispered the answer, her face pale. Containment pods. They're not here to kill, they're here to capture. Another transmission cut through the chaos. The old scientist again. His smile vanished and replaced by something harder. Dr. Vale, you've already discovered the genetic markers. I expected as much. Ethan stepped toward the screen, his surgical laser still clutched in his hand. What are they? The old man sighed, a sound of profound weariness. For 30,000 years, the Kareth civilization guarded something. Not a weapon, not a treasure. A map, Captain Rowe frowned. A map? Yes. A living map. The old scientist smiled sadly, his eyes distant. The coordinates were divided among every newborn child. No computer could steal it, no empire could conquer it. Only together could the children reveal the location. Ethan slowly understood, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Every child carried one fragment. 312 living pieces scattered across hundreds of innocent lives. The old man continued, his voice softening. You call them refugees, we call them keys. The transmission ended. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Finally, Captain Rowe whispered, her voice hollow. My God. Ruiz stared at Ethan, his expression a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension. So the disease. It wasn't designed to kill adults. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. It was designed to leave only the children. The room fell silent. The outbreak. The abandoned rescue mission. The disabled escape pods. The collector fleet. Everything suddenly made horrifying sense. Someone had planned this long before the Mercy of Dawn ever launched, had engineered every detail with cold precision. The first boarding alarm sounded. Collectors have breached Deck 5. Then another. Collectors have breached Deck 4. They weren't fighting. They weren't shooting. They moved with terrifying precision, their armored forms flowing through corridors like liquid metal. Straight toward the children's quarters, Ethan looked around Medical Bay 3. No weapons, no soldiers, only medical equipment. He grabbed an emergency surgical laser, its beam capable of precise incisions or devastating burns. 2 anesthesia drones, their syringes filled with enough sedative to drop a grown man in seconds. Portable oxygen cylinders, 3 magnetic stretchers. Captain Rowe raised an eyebrow. You planning surgery? Ethan smiled faintly, a dangerous glint in his eyes. No. I'm planning to make them regret entering my hospital. The corridors became a battlefield. Collector soldiers advanced silently behind shimmering energy shields, their movements coordinated and precise. Ethan rolled a magnetic stretcher directly beneath them, its graviton coils humming with stored energy. He overloaded the coils with a single command. The floor erupted upward, a localized gravity wave that sent 3 invaders crashing into the ceiling. Before they could recover, anesthesia drones injected them with enough tranquilizer to sedate a star beast. They went limp, their shields flickering and dying. Ruiz burst into laughter over comms, his voice crackling with adrenaline. "Doctor, that was beautiful." Another squad appeared around the corner, weapons raised. Ethan ruptured portable oxygen tanks, and the corridor filled instantly with freezing vapor. Collector thermal optics went blind in the white fog, their advanced sensors useless. The children escaped through maintenance tunnels while the invaders fired helplessly into empty clouds. Every second mattered. Every hallway became another puzzle. A hospital had become a fortress. 37 minutes later, the survivors regrouped inside the central medical laboratory. Captain Rowe's shoulder was bleeding, a deep gash that she'd bandaged with field dressing. Ruiz had broken 2 ribs, his breathing shallow and painful. Only 9 adult crew members remained alive, the rest lost to the disease or the boarding action. The children huddled together behind overturned operating tables, their eyes wide and frightened. The little blue girl still clutched her mechanical bird, its wings trembling against her chest. "Dad, are we winning?" Ethan looked toward the security display. Collector troops now surrounded every exit, hundreds of them, their silver armor gleaming in the dim emergency lights. "No," he admitted quietly. "We're buying time." His medical computer suddenly beeped, a sharp sound that cut through the tension. The final analysis had completed. He opened the report. His breathing stopped. There, after hundreds of failed simulations and countless dead ends, was the first successful treatment. A cure. His hands trembled against the console. "We have it." Captain Rowe rushed beside him, hope blazing across her exhausted face. "You found it?" "Yes." Hope exploded across every exhausted face in the room. The children looked up, their expressions shifting from fear to cautious optimism. Then Ethan kept reading. His smile slowly disappeared, replaced by something hollow and cold. The laboratory grew silent. Captain Rowe noticed first, her hope dimming. "What is it?" Ethan didn't answer. He simply turned the monitor toward her, his hand shaking. At the bottom of the report, one sentence flashed in crimson letters, stark and unforgiving. "Biological reactor stabilization requires a living human neural core. Compatible donors found. 1. Dr. Ethan Vale." The room became completely silent. Even the children stopped breathing, because everyone understood. The cure had finally been found. It would save every child aboard the Mercy of Dawn, but only if the one man they all called Dad willingly gave them his own life. The laboratory fell silent. No one moved. No one spoke. On the monitor, the words continued flashing in crimson. Each pulse of light a countdown none of them wanted to acknowledge. Compatible donor found. Dr. Ethan Vale. Captain Helena Rowe read the report twice, then 3 times, her eyes scanning every line as if searching for a hidden loophole she'd somehow missed. "There has to be another way." "There isn't." "We'll keep searching. There isn't enough time." Outside the reinforced laboratory doors, another explosion echoed through the ship, sending vibrations through the deck plates. The collectors had reached the medical deck. Their boarding craft had punched through the outer hull like needles through flesh, and now their armored soldiers moved through the corridors with terrifying precision. Every explosion brought them closer. The little blue girl slowly looked from Ethan to the monitor and then back again, her 6 eyes blinking in confusion. "Dad?" "What does donor mean?" Nobody answered. Children always noticed silence. She walked closer, her small feet padding softly against the cold metal floor. "Why is everyone crying?" Ethan forced himself to smile, the expression feeling foreign on his face. "They're not." Captain Rowe quietly turned away, because she was. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs she couldn't contain, and she pressed her palm against her mouth to muffle the sound. The collector commander transmitted one final message. The old scientist appeared again on the main screen, his face illuminated by the glow of his own bridge displays. This time, his expression carried no arrogance, no confidence, only certainty. Dr. Vale, you know the truth now. The children cannot survive without the stabilizer. You cannot survive if you activate it. He paused, letting the words settle like stones in still water. You are a good man, so don't waste your life. Give us the children. We will preserve them. They will never know pain again. Ethan stared silently at the screen, his mind racing through calculations and consequences. Then he asked one question, his voice steady, despite everything. What about their freedom? The old scientist said nothing. His silence was answer enough. Ethan nodded slowly. I thought so. He ended the transmission with a single touch, and the screen went dark. Captain Rowe locked every laboratory door, her fingers moving with desperate speed across the security console. No, I'm your commanding officer. I refuse to authorize this. Ethan smiled gently, the expression soft and sad. Captain, when did you last outrank biology? She almost laughed. Instead, she punched the wall, her fist connecting with the metal with a dull thud. There has to be another answer. There isn't. He looked around the laboratory, taking in every detail. Broken medical drones lay scattered across the floor, their internal components exposed and sparking. Scorched operating tables bore the marks of close calls and near misses. Sleeping children wrapped in emergency blankets huddled together in corners, their small bodies trembling even in rest. The little mechanical bird rested beside the smallest girl's feet, its wings still and silent. For the first time, he wasn't looking at patients. He was looking at family. He quietly activated the ship-wide intercom, his finger pressing the button with deliberate calm. This is Dr. Ethan Vale. If anyone is still alive, thank you. Static crackled across the speakers. Then, one by one, voices answered from across the dying ship. Commander Ruiz came through first. I'm here. Head nurse Leora followed, her voice thin but steady, still breathing. Chief Engineer Hassan coughed before responding, barely. Security Officer Mina spoke last, her words clipped and professional. Waiting for orders. Only 8 adults remained. 8 exhausted voices. 8 people who already knew what was coming. None of them tried to stop him. None of them offered false hope. They simply acknowledged his choice with the quiet dignity of those who had already accepted the inevitable. Instead, Commander Ruiz laughed softly, the sound crackling through the intercom. You know, I always thought doctors were supposed to hate paperwork. Ethan smiled despite everything. I do. So stop making more. Laughter echoed across the dying ship. A brief moment of warmth in the growing cold. Even Captain Rowe smiled through tears, her face streaked with moisture and determination. For 30 beautiful seconds, they forgot they were dying. Then the ship shook harder than ever before. Emergency AI announced in its flat, emotionless tone, outer hull breach. Collector forces have reached medical bay. The doors wouldn't hold much longer. Their reinforced frames groaned under repeated impacts, and sparks flew from the hinges. Ethan crouched beside the children, bringing himself to their level. Listen carefully. 312 tiny faces looked toward him, their eyes wide and trusting. I need every one of you to be brave. A little boy immediately raised his hand, his expression serious. We already are. Another child asked the question that hung in the air. Can brave people cry? Ethan smiled, the gesture genuine despite the weight pressing on his chest. Only the strongest ones. Several children nodded seriously. Apparently that made perfect sense. The little blue girl reached into her pocket and pulled out another drawing. This one was different from the first. It showed 312 small children holding hands around one smiling human, their tiny figures forming a protective circle around him. Above them, written in crooked English, "We love you, Dad." Ethan's hands trembled as he took the picture. He carefully folded it and placed it over his heart, pressing it against the steady rhythm beneath his ribs. "I'll keep this forever." The girl smiled. "I know." Captain Rowe quietly opened the reactor chamber, her movements slow and deliberate. The stabilizer pulsed with unstable blue light, casting shadows across the walls. Without a living neural core, it would collapse in less than 4 minutes. The medical computer displayed the countdown in stark white numbers. Ethan removed his medical coat and folded it neatly, placing his doctor's badge on top of the fabric. Head nurse Leora picked it up, her fingers trembling. "I'll return this when you wake up." He smiled at her, the expression soft and fond. "You've always been a terrible liar." For the first time in hours, she laughed. Then she cried harder than ever, her shoulders shaking with sobs she couldn't control. The operation required no anesthesia. The donor had to remain conscious. Every neural pathway had to stay active until the transfer finished, each connection firing in perfect sequence. Ethan climbed onto the surgical platform, his body settling against the cold metal surface. Robotic arms surrounded him, their instruments gleaming under the emergency lights. The medical computer spoke calmly. "Warning, procedure is irreversible." He pressed confirm. Outside, collector soldiers finally breached the laboratory. Captain Rowe and the remaining crew opened fire, their weapons blazing against the armored invaders. Not to win, only to buy seconds. Every second meant another child lived. Commander Ruiz overloaded the gravity generators and collector troops slammed into walls with bone-crushing force. Chief Hassan vented cryogenic coolant through ventilation shafts, turning entire corridors into frozen traps. One by one, the defenders fell back. One by one, they refused to surrender. Inside the reactor chamber, the transfer began. Pain exploded through Ethan's body like nothing he'd ever experienced. Every nerve screamed in protest, every cell burned with white-hot fire. His vision blurred, and the edges of his consciousness began to fray. The medical computer counted calmly, each percentage point a step closer to the end. 12%, 24%, 39%. The reactor slowly stabilized. The blue light began to glow steadier, its pulses becoming more regular. Outside, the collector commander reached the final blast door. He placed one hand against it, his armored fingers pressing against the metal. "Doctor, it's not too late." Ethan laughed weakly, the sound barely audible above the hum of machinery. "It was too late the moment they started calling me Dad." The blast door exploded inward, its fragments scattering across the chamber. Collector soldiers flooded through the opening, their weapons raised and ready. Captain Rowe fired until her rifle clicked empty, then threw it aside and charged forward with nothing but her fists. Commander Ruiz tackled 2 soldiers over the reactor railing, and both disappeared into blue plasma below. The old scientist himself entered the chamber, his white hair disheveled and his lab coat torn. He looked at Ethan with an expression that wasn't hatred. It was regret. "You could have changed the galaxy." Ethan smiled faintly, his eyes already losing focus. "I just did. 71%, 84%, 97%. The reactor erupted with brilliant white light, a flash that seared through every eye in the chamber. Every child aboard the Mercy of Dawn gasped at the same moment, their small bodies convulsing with sudden energy. The disease vanished. Medical scanners across the ship changed simultaneously, their readings shifting from critical to stable. Infection removed. All pediatric patients stable. The cure had worked. The old scientist stared at his own scanner, his face contorting with disbelief. "No, impossible. You gave them your neural matrix." Ethan could barely breathe, each inhalation a struggle. "It wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to my children." Without warning, every collector weapon shut down. Their energy cells went dark. Their systems went silent. The living genetic map inside the children activated, a signal that had been dormant for 30,000 years. Ancient Kareth defense satellites, hidden across the system for millennia, recognized the completed genetic signature. Across the empty void, hundreds of forgotten defense stations awakened, their systems coming online with a surge of golden light. One after another, golden lights appeared across the surrounding system. The collector fleet turned toward them, their sensors screaming warnings. Too late. Thousands of autonomous Guardian drones erupted from hidden moons and shattered asteroids, their forms sleek and deadly. Within seconds, the collector armada disappeared beneath oceans of golden fire. The war ended before anyone aboard the Mercy of Dawn fully understood why. Silence returned. The reactor chamber grew strangely peaceful, the hum of machinery fading to a whisper. The children rushed inside, their small feet pounding against the metal floor. The little blue girl reached Ethan first, her tiny hand wrapping around his. "Dad, we're safe." He smiled, the expression weak but genuine. "I know. You promised. I tried." "No." She shook her head firmly. "You didn't try. You did it." His eyes slowly closed, his breathing becoming shallow. "You have to keep helping people. We will. Promise?" 312 small voices answered together. "We promise." His breathing became slower, each exhale softer than the last. "We'll make you proud." One final smile crossed Ethan's face, a moment of pure peace. "I already am." The monitor beside him emitted one long, quiet tone. No one spoke. Even the surviving collector scientist lowered his head, his arrogance stripped away by something he couldn't understand. Because for the first time in his life, he understood something his civilization had never learned. Love could never be engineered, only chosen. 30 years later, the largest children's hospital in Allied space welcomed patients from more than 200 species. Its corridors echoed with laughter and hope, its wards filled with healing and second chances. Above its entrance stood no statue of a warrior, no admiral, no emperor. Only a bronze sculpture of an exhausted human doctor sitting on the floor, surrounded by laughing alien children. Across the base were engraved the words every graduate memorized before receiving their medical oath. Family is not always given by blood. Sometimes it is given by choice. Every child saved inside those walls received a small mechanical bird before leaving the hospital, its wings carefully crafted and its movements graceful. Most never understood why. Until they grew older, and someone told them the story of the human doctor, who had only meant to heal his patients but became their father instead. Long after the stars forgot the war, the galaxy still remembered one simple truth. 312 alien children never called him doctor. They called him Dad.